Let's speak to Lembit Opik, former Liberal Democrat MP and also friend of Charles Kennedy. Just terribly shocking and very sad news this morning.
It is. I'm not surprised, actually, but because I actually felt it was inevitable if he didn't have a formal political role, and I'm saying that with no joy. Last night, quite presciently, I was in Parliament, and myself and Lib Dem MP and a Lib Dem Lord were all talking about this danger. We didn't realise he was probably already dead by then. But the thing is, this was his life. He had a hunger to serve people, 32 years of it. I thought that he needed to get into the House of Lords quickly because that institution was enormously supportive. And so I found out like 2 hours ago that he's dead. It was very hard to put it into words, really.
How had he been reacting to losing his seat?
I haven't spoken to him since the 7th of May. Alistair Campbell had spoken to him and said he was bearing up well. My own opinion is that, having been through that process myself of defeat, and an unexpected defeat in a sense, it's very difficult to cope with. I had 2 or 3 bad years about it. I'm honest about that now. I've probably experienced real depression. I'm feeling that Charles Kennedy probably was in the same position, and he had the additional challenge. It won't have been alcohol that killed him. Whatever an autopsy says, it was the heartbreak of losing his job. There was no barrier to him self-medicating. And one of the great tragedies about Charles Kennedy is that I think he could have carried on as leader. He could have actually destigmatized an illness known as alcoholism, something we don't do well in this country, but instead he was pushed out of that job. Let's remember that Winston Churchill had his demons with alcohol too, but that's all lost because he was pushed out just after the most successful general election result that the party's ever had.
And you talk about the experience that you had when you lost your seat. I mean, when you lose something that has been an anchor for such a long period, as it clearly was for him, it must be very difficult to deal with. I know he was very supportive to you, wasn't he, when you went through your difficulties?
Well, in 2 ways. I was only an MP for 13 years, and I can be honest about it now. Maybe I was lying to myself at the time, but it's so difficult. I drifted for 2 years. I could have ended up down some plug hole myself, you know, just drifting, but luckily I found my way, I hope. Now, Charles Kennedy will have, I'm sure, gone through the same emotions. He was an enormously empathic man. That's why I think he drank. Shy and empathic, self-medicating with alcohol to deal with an abrasive and difficult world. He helped me when I was going through my personal difficulties, and I was being an ambassador in the press for my personal life and so forth. By an accident of geography, his office just happened to be opposite mine. The number of times I went in there and he supported me, and that's really when I became totally loyal to the man.
Was he always too gentle for politics?
Well, I personally think he wasn't too gentle, but that's why he drank. I think he was empathic. I felt that he could sense and feel, perhaps not without even wanting to, feel what the other person was feeling. And certainly when I was at my darkest hour as an MP, when I was facing endless headlines in the tabloids, it was Charles who, more than any other member of Parliament, was backing me up. Now, that would suggest to me that he has got this gentleness of spirit, and there were times when that was probably too much. It won't be alcohol that killed him, it will be that gentleness and the sorrow I think he will have felt in losing. Now, I don't want to set myself up as a spokesperson for Charles Kennedy or his family. I just happened to have known him, and I was lucky to know him. But I kind of was worried that this was going to happen, and others were too.
I mean, there have been wonderful tributes from across the political spectrum, and just hearing from Nick Clegg saying that when he was at his best, when he was on form, he had more political talent in his little finger than most politicians. For you, what were his greatest strengths, his greatest assets?
He had 3 remarkable strengths. I think he was a great orator in a conversational way. You were talking about the Scottish Highlands character, and I think that Alex Salmond's right. He's got this unique conversational style. The second thing is that he was very, very kind to individuals, and I've described my experience of that. The third thing is he had a steely resolve. His heart told him what was right, what was liberal. He was told he wasn't a patriot by opposing the Iraq War, yet he stood pretty much alone in the House of Commons saying it was wrong, and he was proved right on that. Don't ever be under the illusion that Charles was soft. He was gentle, but he was very, very strong, and he led the party to its highest election result in its history. Now, I felt it was totally wrong for him to be pushed out after that. We could have destigmatized alcoholism if he'd just been given the chance, like we would have if he'd had multiple sclerosis or pneumonia or some other disease. It's an illness, and it wasn't a good enough reason to push him out. That was my view then, it's my view now.
He must have gone through the mill at that time,
Yeah.
when he was out as party leader?
I spent a lot of time with him at that time, and I was literally the last MP standing behind him when he made his resignation speech, and I felt he was treated very abrasively in the party. But this might not be the time to kick it all up again, but I felt he was so hard done by, and he did accept it with a gentleness and a sorrow as well. He didn't seem bitter to me afterwards, but really that took a toll. I think he did sort out his alcohol issues at the time, but clearly, well, in my view at least, he went back to them.
And you've said that you feel he could have remained as party leader. Obviously that is not what happened, but would the party have gone down a very different route if he had have remained? I mean, he voted against the coalition, didn't he?
He did. He was one of the very few who said this coalition is wrong. Now, whether that was correct or not, once again, Charles followed his heart. He wasn't being bitter. He just said, this is going to wreck the party. I happen to agree with him. I wrote a book about this. I wrote a book about how Charles Kennedy was deposed. What would the party have been like under Charles Kennedy? As I say, we might have had a mature national conversation about an illness called alcoholism. That could have helped millions of people. We'd have had a more liberal approach, probably more left-leaning approach, and we'd have had a person who really related to the public. Those things, I suppose, were lost because Charles Kennedy was made to stand down. A terrible mistake for the party and a terrible injustice, in my view, to Charles Kennedy, and I will always feel that.
Lembit Opik, thank you very much.